Hello, learners. Welcome to Literary Literates. I'm Kriti, and today we are going to do a quick revision on the topic literary groups and clubs. So, what are literary groups and what are book clubs? First, we are going to do a quick revision about these two terms literary groups. So, basically, literary groups is a more serious circle of people who gather to study the art of writing and the deep meaning behind the books. It was considered as the study group. So that's why it is a writer-centered inspiration. And what are the book clubs? The book clubs is basically a social group where a group of friends or acquaintances who read the same book meet up to talk about it. So that's why it was a reader-centered inspiration. Now, coming to the next slide, we have the first university wits. So, who were the university wits? In the late 16th century, English playwrights and pamphlet writers who were educated at Oxford or Cambridge University were considered as the university wits. They transformed the native English drama into a more sophisticated literary form, setting the stage for William Shakespeare. So, who were the members? Christopher Marlowe, Thomas Kidd, Thomas Nash, Thomas Lodge, Robert Greene, and George Beck. Coming to the next, the empiricist philosopher. A school of philosophy emphasizing that knowledge comes primarily from sensory experience. They used to emphasize the sensory experience where the knowledge is innate. It was central to the Enlightenment, challenging the rationalist view. Okay? And the members were Francis Bacon, John Locke, David Hume, George Berkeley, John Stuart Mill, Roger Bacon, and Bertrand Russell. Sorry if I mispronounced the names. Now, the next one is the Metaphysical School of Poetry. So, the founder of Metaphysical School of Poetry was John Donne, and this group was established because this group was established in the 17th century because of the poets using conceits, complex poetic devices, often starting with metaphors. The term was first used disparagingly by Samuel Johnson, who felt their poetry was too intellectual and unnatural. The members were George Herbert, Henry Vaughan, Abraham Cowley, Richard Crashaw, Andrew Marvell, and Thomas Strahan. Okay? The next one is the Kit Kat Club. This group was established in 1690 by the publisher Jacob Tonson. It was an early 18th century London club with strong political and literary associations. The political figures were Robert Walpole, Richmond, Kingston, and Charles Datty Gwynne. The members were Richard Steele, Joseph Edison, and William Congreve. The members were committed to the Whig Party and the promotion of the Protestant succession of the House of Hanover. The next one is the Scribblers Club. So, in 18th century, an informal association of authors who satirized the learned abuses of the time were considered to be the founders of Scribblers Club. And the main founders of Scribblers Club were Alexander Pope and Jonathan Swift. They created the persona Martinus Scribblus, a fictional pedant whose memoirs were used to mock false learning. The members were John Arbuthnot, John Gay, and Thomas Parnell. The next one is the Cavalier Poets. So, the Cavalier Poets were considered as the supporters of King Charles I during the English Civil War. Their poetry often celebrated Carpe Diem, which means seize the day. They used to celebrate courtly love and loyalty to the crown. The members were John Suckling, Richard Lovelace, Robert Herrick, and Thomas Carew, and William Davenant. Now, Garrick Club. Founded in 1831 in London, it was named after the famous actor David Garrick. The founders were James Winston, Samuel James Arnold, and General Sir Samuel Beazley. It was established as a place where actors and men of education and refinement might meet on equal terms. The members were Charles Dickens, John Everett Millais, Mill, Lord Lytton, Kingsley Amis, H.G. Wells, and D.G. Rossetti. Now, transcendentalism. Transcendentalism is basically a romantic movement which happened in the British literature, which where we used to call it. Sorry, we used to call it romantic movement. A 19th century American philosophical and literary movement where the members believed the inherent goodness of people and nature, emphasizing intuition over objective empiricism. The founders were Ralph Waldo Emerson and Walt Whitman. Members were Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, Elizabeth Peabody, M.S. Bronson Alcott, Orestes Brownson, Frederick Henry Hedge, Theodore Parker, and Ellen Sturgis Hooper. Now, the next term is stream of consciousness. It was a narrative mode depicting the multitudinous thoughts and feelings passing through the mind. The term was originally coined by psychologist William James in the Principles of Psychology in 1890, and it was expanded by Virginia Woolf, Dorothy Richardson, William Faulkner, Toni Morrison, James Joyce, Jack Kerouac, Jose Saramago. Okay, now the next one is the movements. A group of British poets in the 1950s who emphasized traditional forms and rationalism over romanticism. The members were Philip Larkin, Donald Davy, Kingsley Amis, John Wayne, Robert Conquest, Elizabeth Jennings, and Thomas Gunn. Now, the next one is the Oxford Movement. It was a movement of high church members within the Church of England. The leader was John Henry Newman. This movement was also known as Tractarianism. It sought to restore Catholic traditions to the Anglican liturgy. The members were Richard Hurrell Froude, John Keble, and Edward Pusey. Now, the next one is Imagism, an early 20th century movement that favored precision of imagery and clear, sharp language. The founders were Ezra Pound and T.E. Hume. Members were William Carlos Williams, T.H. Lawrence, Hilda Doolittle, Maddox Ford, Richard Eldington, F.S. Flint, and James Joyce. Now, the next one is the war poets. So basically, after World War One, poets who wrote about their experiences during wartime was considered as the war poets. Their work shifted from the initial patriotism of Prue to the gritty, tragic realism of Owen and Sassoon. The members were Alan Seeger, Hedwin, Edward Thomas, Siegfried Sassoon, Robert Graves, Edmund Blunden, Rupert Brooke, and Wilfred Owen. Now, the next one is the Bloomsbury Group. Guys, it is the most important and often asked question that who were the members of Bloomsbury Group? It was an influential group of associated English writers, intellectuals, and artists. Founders were Vanessa Bell and Virginia Woolf. They were famous for their liberal views on sexuality and their rejection of Victorian strictness. Members were Ian Foster, G. E. Moore, Roger Fry, Leonard Woolf, Lytton Strachey, Rupert Brooke, Clive Bell, and Arthur David Whaley. Now, the next one. Fabian Society, a British socialist organization established to advance socialism via gradualist and reformist means. Members were Sidney Oliver, Ramsay MacDonald, Charles Marson, Annie Besant, H.G. Wells, G.B. Shaw, Oliver Lodge, Graham Wallace, and Emmeline Pankhurst. Next one is art for art's sake movement. The belief that art should be judged only by its beauty, not by any moral or political message. The members were Walter Pater, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, Edgar Allan Poe, Arthur Symons, and Oscar Wilde. Rhymers Club, a group of London based poets founded in 1890. The members were Ernest Dowson, Lionel Johnson, Richard Leigh Gallienne, Arthur Symons, John Gray, W.B. Yeats, Oscar Wilde, Victor Plarr, Alfred Douglas, and John Davidson. The next one is Pre Raphaelite Brotherhood. It is also an important group where a group of English painters, poets, and critics aimed to return to the detail, intense colors, and complex composition of Italian art before Raphael. The founder was Dante Gabriel Rossetti. Members were William Holman Hunt, John Everett Millis, James Collinson, Thomas Woolner, Frederick George Stephens, and William Michael Rossetti. Lake Poets, a group of poets who lived in the Lake District of England and at the turn of the 19th century. There were only three poets who were considered as the Lake Poets: William Wordsworth, S.T. Coleridge, and Robert Southey. The next one is the Danrin School. It is a school of Japanese haikai poetry founded by Nishiyama Soin. The name literally means talkative forest or literary forest. The school aimed to move away from the serious classical tone of earlier poetry toward a more playful common style. The next is Graveyard Churchyard Poets. It is also an important group where we can see many previous year questions have been asked in this topic. 18th century poets characterized by gloomy meditations on mortality and the skulls and coffins of the graveyard. The members were Thomas Gray, Robert Blair, Thomas Parnell, Thomas Wharton, Christopher Smart, Oliver Goldsmith, James Macpherson, Thomas Percy, William Cowper, William Collins, John Keats, William Blake, William Mason, James Beattie, and John Dyer. The next is the Parnassians, a group of late 19th century French poets where they reacted against Romanticism by emphasizing formal restraint and impassivity in their work. The members were Charles Leconte de Lisle, sorry if I pronounced it wrong, Jose Maria de Herdia, Sully Prudhomme, and Francis Copé. Now, the next is symbolism, a movement that started in the late 19th century in France and Belgium, where symbolists used evocative language and symbols to express individual emotional experiences rather than objective reality. The members were Paul Verlaine, Tristan Corbier, Arthur Rimbaud, and Stephen Mallarmé. The next is the fireside poets, also known as schoolroom or household poets. They were the first American poets to rival British popularity. The members were Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, William Cullen Bryant, John Greenleaf Whittier, James Russell Lowell, and Oliver Wendell Holmes. The next is Harlem Renaissance, A cultural and intellectual movement of the 1920s involving African American writers in the Harlem neighborhood of New York. It celebrated African American culture and heritage, fostering a new Black identity. The members were Carl Van Victon, Charlotte Osgood Mason, and Virgil Thompson. The next is the confessionalist. American poets who emerged in 1950s, noted as 1980s in source, focused on highly personal subject matter. Members were Robert Lowell, Annie Sexton, John Berryman, and Sylvia Plath. New York School of Poets, an informal school of American poets active in the 1950s and 60s. Members were John Ashbery, Franco O'Hara, James Schuller, Kenneth Coach, Barbara Guest, Ron Paget, and Ted Berrigan. Next, Black Mountain Poets. They were also known as the Projectivists. This was a group of mid 20th century postmodern poets associated with Black Mountain College in the US. They followed Charles Olson's theory of projective verse, which suggested the poem's form should be an extension of the poet's breath. Hungry Generation, a group of approximately 40 poets in West Bengal who revolted against colonial canons and sought to return to the railroads. Members were Shakti Chattopadhyay, Malay Roy Chaudhary, Subimal Basak, and Samir Roy Chaudhary. New Formalism, a late 20th and early 21st century movement in American poetry, promoting a return to metrical and rhymed verse. Members were Robert Frost, who were also known as Precursor, Richard Wilbur, James Merrill, Anthony Heck, and Donald Justice. Cyclic poets, a shorthand term for early Greek epic poets who were approximate contemporaries of Homer. Members were Homer, Stasinis of Cyprus, Creophilus of Samos, Paniasis of Halicarnassus, Arctinus of Miletus, and Lysias of Pyria. Georgian poetry, a group of early 20th century poets whose work was published in anthologies during the reign of King George V. Members were Edmund Bulden, Robert Brooke, Robert Graves, D.H. Lawrence, Walter de la Mare, Siegfried Sassoon, and John Drinkwater. So, guys, all the best for your CUET PG exam. So, this was a quick revision video on literary groups and clubs. Hope this will help you because as you know आप अभी PYQs अभी सॉल्व कर रहे होंगे तो इन इससे भी क्वेश्चंस आपके 4 to 5 क्वेश्चंस बनते हैं जिससे आपको 15 to 20 मार्क्स आपको आसानी से मिल सकते हैं अगर 10 to 12 मार्क्स ना सॉरी So guys, all the best for your exam. And as you know, the अभी आप PYQ सॉल्व कर रहे होंगे ऑफ कोर्स तो आपको इसमें से करीब 4 to 5 क्वेश्चंस देखने को मिलेंगे एंड इट इज़ अ स्कोरिंग टॉपिक आप अगर इसे अच्छे से रिवाइज करें तो आप 10 to 12 मार्क्स आसानी से स्कोर कर सकते हैं बाकी ऑल द बेस्ट Hope you liked the video. Do subscribe and like our channel and comment down below your response about this video. And I want to ask one question about this whole literary groups and book clubs. So, name one of the university wits who never went to any Oxford or Cambridge University, but still considered as a legend of Senecan tragedy and a legend university wit. Okay, so all the best. Goodbye.